don't get physical. I don't get physical. I don't get physical. I don't get physical. One, two, one.
Hello, my dear friends and family. Operator Starsky here. It's so good to see you, my friends. So good to see a lot of our American friends from the United States. I forgot that it must be an early morning. But on the other hand, it's really, really good because today we will be talking specifically about you guys. All right. And specifically, this stream is dedicated mostly to the United States, but I think that it will be also very, very educational for everyone. Europe, Australia, New Zealand, all that stuff. Cardiff, hello, hello. Oh my God, it's so good to see people from Cardiff joining us every single time. And you know that all of my prayers, all of my rays of love and respect and support always go to the legendary people of Cardiff. You guys are always in our prayers and in our thoughts. Today we will talk about one very interesting topic because yesterday in the commentaries I received several questions from our dear viewers asking, for example, realistically, where can Russia, in case of this horrible war or hybrid war between Russia and the United States, where potentially can Shahed long-range drones be launched from, all right? Because we know that United States is separated from the terrorist federation by oceans, and basically United States of America is, let's say, very much safe and secure, right, in terms of such battles. But we will talk about that, and also there are several questions about what kind of purpose of all that is in general, right? So I decided to dedicate this stream specifically to this topic, explain just a bit about the hybrid warfare, because echo, seriously? Just a second, wait a minute. What do I mean echo? Okay, we have, all right, sound settings. You know that because, wait a second, okay. Really, guys, please let me know if there's a lot of echo, because no idea. Okay, Microsoft, yeah, voice isolation, hard to tell. But let me also check this one. All right, I will turn this stuff off. And now I'm turning this stuff on. All right, so dear Silicat, if there's echo, apparently something on your end, because there in the chat people are saying that everything's fine. I'm sorry for any technical inconvenience. United States Army is probably one of the strongest armies in the world, if not the strongest army in the world, right? In terms of its professionalism, in terms of its equipment. Two strongest air forces, we all know that, the US Air Force and also Navy, Air Force, all that stuff. We know that United States of America can basically not be afraid of any threat pretty much. All right, if we're talking China, North Korea, Iran, Russia separately. All right, but speaking about the modern warfare, okay, because according to numerous experts and numerous people who know something about war, we always prepare for the past wars. And Russia is not waging conventional wars anymore. If Russia waged a conventional war against the United States not involving nuclear weapons, then of course, like, it's completely obvious that Russia would be literally demolished and obliterated within several days, all right? But Russia is not waging conventional wars, my friends. Russia is very, very professional at something that they invented, and what they're calling hybrid warfare. And hybrid warfare is something that was already studied in multiple studies, multiple research. You may find it online. The CSIS and other organizations, and also the American intelligence communities, they also studied that. All those tons of research is available there online. And one thing I wanted to talk about is wargaming. All right, let's have a tiny wargaming today, because I want you to just understand what you can expect in terms of this hybrid warfare, in case this hybrid warfare is waged on the territory of the United States, which is something very important for the civilians, so they know what to expect, all right, based on what we experienced in Ukraine, for example, and also in our European countries over the past couple of years. And also for the American law enforcement and American intelligence, and generally the security sector of the United States, because this is, again, very, very important. I know that they already study and prepare to this, but maybe they will find some very interesting insights from our today's stream, if they will, all right, if they care. So what do we mean when we say hybrid warfare? According to all those multiple studies and according to our observations, the hybrid warfare always involves all sorts of leverage. We're not talking specifically military, but involvement of military forces, but we're also talking about diplomatic, economic leverage, and also proxies, all right? And again, United States Army is trained to face Russian soldiers on the battleground, those like Russian tanks that already don't exist pretty much, right, and stuff like that, all that rusty metal that can be easily obliterated with American Air Force alone. But at the same time, that is something that I will address today, right? I will save this commentary to return to it later. But at the same time, there are such things as proxy wars. For example, there's a lot of pro-Russian talking heads on the television and in the social media saying that Ukraine is a proxy state of the United States, right? That the war between Russian invaders and Ukrainian defenders, that's literally United States proxy fighting against the beautiful democratic Russian motherland. Russians talk about it still, all right? Even after Donald Trump discovered that Ukraine is not his proxy, because even though Ukraine is called America's puppet, but for some reason Ukrainians don't really obey their American puppeteer, right, when he tells them to like give up territories and stuff like that. And proxies involved in such wars are probably the most effective weapons. Okay, what kind of proxies are we talking, for example, on the American territory? You will be most probably surprised to learn that there can be actually quite a few. Let's start with Alaska, because according to the recent polls, approximately 36% of Alaskan citizens consider seceding, all right, from the United States, consider actually declaring independence. That is an open data based on the survey of 35,000 adults conducted between 2nd and 5th February 2024. 36% of all the people questioned, all right, surveyed in this poll, they basically say that they support the idea of independent Alaska. And of course, it's very, very suspicious that at the same time, we've heard already several claims coming from the Russian Terrorist Federation that actually, Alaska is kind of Russian land, all right? Alaska is kind of native Russian territory that was literally snatched from Russian Empire back in the days. They paid us like a bunch of gold and just took all that beautiful Russian territory. 36%, yes, it wasn't me. That's according to that survey. I will drop a link that I have, so you don't think that I'm bullshitting you, all right? It's there in the chat. Just for your information, all right? What kind of reasons for, be, all right? What kind of reasoning behind, for example, Alaska to separate? Local control over land and resources can be potentially because Alaska is unusual in how much of it is federally controlled. The federal government is the largest landowner in Alaska at about 60%, right? It can be fiscal sovereignty, basically keep more of what they generate, design a system that fits Alaska, and also geography and security, because Alaska is an Arctic frontline, and they can justify their decision with the fact that Alaska is the Arctic frontline and they want their own foreign policy voice. For example, all right, there can be any reason behind that. Reasons can be natural and reasons can be absolutely artificial, because, for example, in Ukraine, they used a mix of those, mostly, of course, artificial reasons, like, for example, Ukrainians prosecuting and repressing Russian-speaking Ukrainians, right? Which is a complete nonsense and bullshit, because, for example, Azov was born already months after the first messages, all right, in the Russian media that Ukrainian nationalists are killing Russian-speaking people in Ukraine en masse. And Azov was actually born after several months, in May 2014, after all those crimes, all right, that Russians address to Azov, all right, the crimes that were allegedly committed by Azov, like all those mass graves with Russian population that were never found in Donbass and stuff like that. So Azov, that was born in Kharkiv, was almost 100% Russian speaking. That's again for information. So let's base our wargaming on this fact, right, that Alaska wants to all of a sudden wants to separate for some unknown reasons, for all those reasons that we discussed previously. And you will not see any like Russian troops, you will not see Russian green men, most probably you will see like local American guys wearing patches like that, all right? Looks absolutely legit. So, do you play the balalaika? Thank God I'm not. I suck at playing guitar, but I still prefer playing something with more than 3 strings. So most probably you will see something like that on their patches, maybe some other design. That's literally what I found on the internet using Google search. And all of a sudden you can see that a bunch of guys start taking control over the local administrations in Alaska, right? Taking police departments, taking ammunition, taking smaller arms, and gaining access to heavier weaponry, all right? Most probably even attacking the bases, the military bases of the local National Guard. So what can be the possible response? All right, Alaska кормит всю Россию. Yeah, Alaska is feeding all Russia. Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we heard a lot in Ukraine. And what can be the most obvious reaction, for example, from the United States in case this scenario is implemented? All right. So first of all, we know that the primary federal military headquarters for Homeland Defense and civil support, the U.S. Northern Command, will be planning coordinating the Department of Defense, Homeland Defense, and defense support of civil authorities. And also we know that the National Guard will be involved in this on the first place, we all understand. And one of the missions, right, one of the goals will be to immediately contain and protect the people and infrastructure in that area, which is extremely hard because of the landscape, because of the terrain, because of a lot of settlements don't actually have road access, and also cut external support and secure the maritime plus air approaches. Also, intelligence, cyber communication dominance will be established, or attempts will be made to establish that. But just to remind you, the Trump administration, and it was in the media a lot, they decided to cut the financing for the active cyber measures, all right. And also, again, just to remind you, the biggest probably Alaska problem is logistics. So that is something that they will face. And what sort of combat can we expect in that area? Of course, we can expect that the United States may massively involve the Air Force in order to suppress the known concentrations of the separatist personnel in that area, 100%. But at some point, they will find that the area is extremely saturated with manpads, with anti-air measures in that area. All of a sudden, they will find the Alaskan separatists highly armed with plenty of manpads, okay, which will make the usage of attack aircraft in that area, let's say, highly unreasonable, all right, after losing quite a few aircraft. That is literally based on what Ukraine faced in 2014, okay, when a bunch of local Donbass separatists all of a sudden discovered hundreds, if not thousands, of manpads literally hidden, all right, in the local coal mines and salt mines, and also a bunch of Buk 2M air defense systems and all that stuff. They just bought it in the military surplus store, all right. Happens all the time. They're just fishing and, fished some of those on the shore. So what else can we expect? Of course, the United States Navy will also attempt to cut all sorts of possible supplies from the sea, because like a tiny suspicion will be raised in the American society, like what if all this shit is backed by somebody, all right? But you will see, for example, Russian Foreign Ministry Lavrov with his fucking face of a dying horse sitting there in front of the cameras, saying that no, there is not a single Russian soldier involved in this operation, all right? We respect the American sovereignty and territorial integrity, but we also respect the will and desire of local people to define and to choose their future and their destiny, all right? But no, those guys, they're not our guys, all right? So you will see a lot of statements like that. You will see Putin talking on the television saying that we don't participate in that. Of course, we respect American people so much. We never wanted to harm American people because they are great and whatever. But at the same time, we can provide all the necessary support with establishing, communication with those brave people that decided to fight for their freedom, all right? And of course, in other segments of the Russian media, you will start seeing a lot, like literally growing number of messages about fucking massacre that American National Guard committed in Alaska, in different, tiny locations there, with plenty of mass grave shootings, tortures, and stuff like that of people that literally want to be free and separate, which of course will provoke a lot of condemnation, all right, from the Russians. You'll most probably even see individuals like Patrick Lancaster literally streaming from that area and talking about those horrible war crimes committed by the American National Guard against their very, very own people. So we will see that. Returning to the naval front, all right, returning to the possible naval supply routes, we know that United States will most probably use their navy in order to cut all possible supplies between Russia and the United States, because even though they know, all right, and Russians know that they know, but they will play the same stupid game as they played in 2014 with Ukraine and the rest of the world. And here, American Navy will face something that they have never faced before. Things like naval drones, right? Naval AI-controlled, AI-powered drones that work in swarms, kind of drones that Russians already utilize in the Black Sea, that literally work in swarms that don't cost much, that are AI-powered, so the AI can use this swarm to actually hunt American frigates, American destroyers, and they will face this for the very, very first time, and they will be asking, of course, what the fuck, what the hell is that shit, all right? Where did they get those drones? They printed everything in Alaska on their 3D printers, 100%. At the same time, we will see strikes conducted using something that looks like Shahed drones. Of course, Russia and Iran will be saying that they are not our drones. Those proud guys, all right, they printed everything on their 3D printers, because today it's easy. They can just go to a forest, cut a tree, and make a Shahed drone. Those Shahed drones will be primarily striking the headquarters of the decision-making centers. They will be striking oil refineries, they will be striking oil storages, they will be targeting the logistic routes, right, in the United States. And where will they be launched from, you may ask? And the answer to that is basically a Russian Shadow fleet that currently possesses between 900 and 1,900 ships that can be launched as launching platforms, right? Because you don't really need an airfield as long as like 1,500 feet to launch a tiny Shahed. You can literally launch it from a truck, all right? And Russia, at this very point in time, Russia has between 900 and 1,900 Shadow Fleet ships, Shadow Fleet tankers, and other sorts of ships that are wearing all sorts of flags, not necessarily Russian flags. They can be wearing flying, all right, so they can be flying Mexican flags, they can be flying Canadian flags, they can be flying Chinese flags, all sorts of them. At this very point, Ukraine, all the European Union, and quite a few NATO countries are struggling with locating those ships, all right, because the world ocean is a very, very big place. You can easily hide that many ships, and it's not an easy task to actually track all of them. What sort of capacity has the United States at this point to track the Russian Shadow Fleet tankers and other ships, considering the fact that they're saying, like, guys, that's not our problem, that is primarily the European problem, all right? Deal with them yourself. So that's another thing to remember. And at some point we realize that besides all of the Russian Navy that may not suck that much, but together with all the Russian military vessels, right, that they have in their possessions at this point, that are not turned into submarines, all right, by Ukrainian Navy, that basically, I cannot say that it doesn't exist. I know a lot of brave Ukrainian sailors, but not a lot of Ukrainian destroyers, right? So besides all that goodness that Russians have, in addition to that, they have approximately, all right, pessimistically, 2,000 more vessels that can be used for the military purpose, all right? Then they can be used as launch platforms. And when all this starts happening, and when we will see literally hundreds of Shaheds flying at the United States will face the same problem as Ukraine is facing nowadays, but not only Ukraine, generally speaking, the whole European Union, because the whole European Union is struggling very, very much with providing necessary anti-air missiles to Ukraine, because the number of drones that is launched on a daily or nightly basis at Ukraine, and also once in a week, all right, like roughly once in a week. We're talking hundreds of drones, sometimes 700 drones launched at Ukraine at once. This one I will also address, my friend, just a second. They will face a problem like that. The capacity of the United States in producing anti-air missiles is much lower than capacity of Russian terrorists in producing low-cost, long-range, primitive and stupid Shahed drones armed with Starlinks, literally Starlinks installed on board, or armed with modules that use American SIM cards and American cell networks. Okay, they are controlled via different channels, and they're also AI powered. So basically, they can recognize targets like oil rigs, oil refineries, oil storages, all that stuff. All that actually makes American Army functional and strong. So those will be hit, again, based on Ukrainian experience, because those who remember early 2022 and that fucked up oil crisis that Ukrainian had, when we literally had to stand in the queue, right, to receive like 20 liters of petrol or diesel, just like basically Russia, all right, like Russian western, southern, eastern regions nowadays because of the fuel shortages. And of course, Crimea. United States are actually risking facing that very stuff. Besides all that, the population of the United States is more than 300 million. That is 10 times the population of Ukraine, roughly speaking, which means that most probably United States will also face 10 times the terrorist attacks on their territory. That will involve FPV drones interrupting operations in some of the largest American airports. For example, JFK Airport, that's some of the biggest airports in the world right now. The density of the aircraft over that airport is absolutely freaking insane. You may compare this to, for example, the situation after 9/11, all right, when the air connectivity over the United States literally failed, all right, literally collapsed for several weeks, if not months. That will be also a threat because there are, you may not realize it, all right? I will just inform you, okay, just so you keep that in mind. There will be quite a few American citizens, and most probably not necessarily proud American patriots, but literally people with different addictions, people struggling financially and stuff. And we will face a lot of those guys ready, absolutely ready, to sell their motherland, to sell their beloved United States for several $100. All right. That will be hard via social media, that will be recruited, all right? And they will either believe that they will be doing something very, very good for the United States. For example, I don't know, they will believe that they are selected by CIA to deliver some special package to a headquarters of a terrorist organization somewhere in the United States, all right, and blow it to molecules. But in reality, of course, they will be delivering that stuff to, for example, headquarters of National Guards, police departments, and things like that. We know how the Russian FSB works. They are very, very effective at recruiting people. Okay, so besides that, we will see a lot of those guys launching the drones. Literally several, or even one FPV drone over JFK airport is completely enough to stop it from functioning and completely collapse all that air connectivity in the area. All right, and how exactly do you intercept a tiny FPV drone? That is another question. Okay. Is the United States Army actually prepared to fight against such threats? Ukraine actually helps the United States to prepare for this. Okay, we actually do, and we actually cooperate with the United States currently, explaining to them how to fight drone threats, something that the United States Army is not really prepared to face on the battlefield, because United States Army is very, very good at fighting conventionally. Yes, they're good at fighting insurgents as well, but not really the hybrid troops. And that is the type of chaos we are talking about. United States Air Force will be pretty much paralyzed in Alaska because of saturation with manpads and air defense. Their land troops will be struggling, all right, in terms of terrain and in terms of the logistics, due to the Russian Shahed attacks. And also, one thing we should keep in mind, that a company of guys trained in drone warfare, and I'm talking specifically about the FPV guys, they can eliminate a whole company within 10 minutes, which is something that is proved by the mutual military exercise in Europe over the past year, over and over and over again. All right. United States Army has a lot of tanks, a lot of APCs, all right, a lot of big, heavy moving targets that can be eliminated by a cheap $500 worth FPV drone with a PG-7 warhead attached to it. Of course, there are things that can be utilized to neutralize those FPV drones. Of course, we're talking the electronic warfare, also jammers, but there are also fiber optic FPV drones that you cannot literally suppress with anything. First of all, you cannot detect them because they don't emit any sort of signals. And you cannot suppress them because they don't emit any sort of signals. That is another thing to keep in mind. Do you know if Europe is finding countermeasures against drones? We will talk about this one as well, right? I'm saving all of those commentaries to address them a bit later. So the war that United States Army and also United States intelligence and other intelligence community should be prepared for, all right, is the hybrid warfare, because that sort of scenery is possible, all right, and if it's possible, they should prepare for it, which is, by the way, something that makes, for example, United States much stronger than Russians, because Russians are only prepared to what they already know, right? They know that Ukraine may launch Neptune missiles, that is why they install plenty of air defenses, but they are not prepared to the fact that, for example, tiny undersea drones, all right, like subsea babies that can literally attack submarines docked in the ports. Invading USA is impossible for two reasons: geography and rednecks. Well, as for geography, look, do you know where Cuba is located? Cuba is located roughly 170 or 200 kilometers from Florida. What kind of ships are docked in Cuba? Very, very often, all right? You'll be surprised to see a lot of ships, flying that Aquafresh flag, right, that Russian flag, because they constantly have mutual military exercises with Cubans. Russians keep their presence very, very fucking close to the American borders, to the actual American border. And some of those ships are armed with nuclear weapons. Again, something to keep in mind. Not necessarily working, right? Not necessarily functioning nuclear weapons, but they are there. So they have acoustic sound detecting devices to identify drones by sound. Yes, that is correct. Also, they have plenty of stuff like, let me show it to you. For example, where's the A button? Jesus, where is the air? There it is. It's this one, for example, all right, this is the so-called FARA radio location system. It's not something new, all right. This one is used by Russians since 2014 on the Ukrainian territory. Of course, it's not produced in Ukraine. It's only produced in Russia. We know that for sure. And what this stuff does is it's a land radar. The FARA radio location system can identify walking targets, moving targets. It can identify birds. It can identify people moving, all right, across the terrain. It can, of course, identify cars. That is something that is nowadays used by Russians to identify Ukrainian drones, and Ukrainians also use such radio location systems as well. We invented quite a few of them. So we can use them, all right, against Russians in order to identify Russian drones. They can really identify birds flying in the area because Russian FPVs, they're kind of size of birds. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Yes, there are measures to identify those FPV drones, and Ukraine is currently saturated with those measures. I'm talking about Ukrainian battlefield, saturated with radio location systems of that sort on both sides. As for the range, that is literally several kilometers. There's, as far as I remember, 236, something like that. Something of that sort. That is really a tactical radar, right? It's not a big shed. Russians were installing them, for example, when we were deployed to Donbass, and it was before the full-scale invasion. Russians were literally installing them in windows, all right, somewhere in the buildings, and they were scanning the area constantly. So they pretty much had very, very strong reconnaissance compared to our reconnaissance because they were bringing all those radars from the Terrorist Federation and supplying them to the hybrid troops. And in case a similar scenario happens in the United States, of course, they can expect pretty much the same. All right. So what is the summary, right? At this very point, we can see that the type of the warfare that is primarily waged in the United States, there are elements of hybrid warfare to that, as we already know. For example, those aircraft heading from Europe towards the United States, towards Canada, that were exposed carrying incendiary and explosive devices that were brought there by, I don't know, probably Martians, right? Or Albanians. Albanians, 100%, you know. We all know who were behind that. So there are already elements of the hybrid warfare that are implemented in Russia's war against Russia's covert war against the United States, and the primary type of warfare that is used is actually informational warfare. According to the FBI, according to the indictment that were published last year, we talked about them last year, 2024 actually. According to the information that we have at hand, there are between 2,000 and 3,000 paid Russian propagandists operating on the American territory that use social media, that are also enforced by bot farms in order to increase the number of hatred and destabilization in the American society. They throw all sorts of messages that are generated in native Russian companies, right? Like Russia Today, like Russian social design projects. They generate messages in order to destabilize American society, and they feed both sides, all right? Because they don't necessarily need a leverage on Trump. What they actually need is to destabilize American society. That's what evil forces do, all right? Not because they are so much afraid, all right, that United States will one day say, we had enough, all right, Russia, you should give up, all right, you should become a democratic country. No, it's because Russians are ruled by evil regime, all right. So currently we can see a lot of messages generated and thrown into the informational space in the United States that are designed to destabilize American society, that are designed to make people on the liberal sides hate, like literally hate people on the conservative side, all right, and vice versa. So Hello, Deborah. We were discussing something very, very good. Don't worry, you can always rewatch this stream. And unfortunately, not a lot of Americans understand the scale of the informational warfare. Because, for example, in Ukraine, the informational warfare was waged for several decades, I would say. For several decades, the very, very first mentions of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic was around 2004-2008, as far as I remember. That was literally a tiny, tiny organization of Russian fanatics that would, I don't know, visit graves of the Soviet soldiers and stuff like that. Why didn't Ukraine do anything, all right, to suppress those tiny separatist organizations? Well, basically because Ukraine was ruled by pro-Russian regimes, all right, pro-Russian President Yanukovych, who himself in 2004 actually gathered a meeting in Severodonetsk, and they proclaimed their readiness, all right, to separate from Ukraine, all right. The very, very first mention, all right, of the separatist movements in Ukraine was in 2004 when President not president, but president candidate Yanukovych, the pro-Russian fuck, when he gathered all sort of pro-Russian oligarchs in Severodonetsk and actually said that in case pro-European forces in Ukraine win the elections that I fucking forged myself, then we will separate. All right. That was 2004. The informational warfare is being waged in the United States. It's not a secret. And the next step of this warfare is literally the hybrid warfare stage. And that is something that the United States should keep in mind, all right? They should keep in mind. Again, Russians were talking about Alaska for quite a while already. 2022 on some of my streams, we kind of laughed and joked about it, all right? It doesn't really seem like a joke to me today. Because if we check out the messages in the Russian media, they also joke about this. So, what else can we add to that? Again, according to different polls that you can find online, the separatist movement in California is approximately 31%. The separatist movement in Texas is roughly a quarter. Just a second, just not to be, голослівний, let me read this to you. So, yeah, Texas 31%, California 29% of people that don't mind about the separation. Those can actually join those guys, all right? Again, it's a wargaming. We're talking about things that can potentially happen based on what we already saw. And that is just so you could understand the capacity of a terrorist state called Russian Federation that may not be very strong in terms of military power. Again, they're fighting for 4 years already against Ukraine. That is absolutely incomparable to Russia in terms of industry and resources and military resources and manpower, all right? But they cannot take even a single major city in 4 years. There's 22 of them, and Russia doesn't control a single major city after 22 years, after 4 years of their full-scale invasion. Besides Sevastopol, Donetsk and Luhansk, right, like in 2014. They might not be very strong in this regard, but they are still strong in unconventional warfare that no one except Ukraine is prepared for. That is why it's absolutely necessary to keep communicating with Ukraine, to keep military partnership, to keep partnership in terms of intelligence with Ukrainian side, because Ukraine is that very force that can actually help you fight against the hybrid threats that, again, not a single country in this world is prepared for. Speaking of China, China has a very, very close exchange in terms of technologies with the Russian terrorists. China has, I would say, more access to electronic components, and they already introduced some of their, I would say, absolutely horrible drones, because they have that heavy bomber drone that was presented literally a couple of weeks ago for the very first time. And that drone is capable of carrying several tons of weaponry, or 100 AI-powered tinier drones that can be actually used in swarms in order to attack their targets. So it's necessary to keep this communication and military partnership, because Ukraine can not only help you in terms of countering Russian hybrid warfare, but also the Chinese high military technologies, all that recent shit that they are producing in China. Okay, let alone North Korea, because, again, unlike all other countries in the world, Ukraine has experience in actually fighting against North Korean troops. So basically, Ukraine is the country that, unlike other countries, has real experience of facing and eliminating Russians and North Koreans, something that any other country has at this point. All right. We are talking about the real axis of evil there, Russia and North Korea. So that is something to keep in mind. China is preparing its invasion of Taiwan. We already see many cases when China is deploying its own shadow fleet, all right, its own tankers and cargo vessels that are used as launch platforms for Chinese missiles and Chinese drones. It's already happening, all right? They are already arming their fleet with those. They can be operating undercover, all right? Flying, I don't know, flag of Australia, all right? Flag of Indonesia, whatever flag. Greetings to Cape Town. Hello, my friend. They can be using those in order to disguise their ships and easily launch their drones and their missiles, staying completely undetected. I want to move to the woods. I would not recommend that. All right, woods are a sketchy place. But why am I explaining all this? Hello, Silver Earth. Hello, my friend. Why am I explaining all this? In 2020 and 2021, I tried to share some of my tiny military experience with Ukrainian civilians, and Ukrainian civilians were commenting angrily, saying that you are scaring the shit out of peaceful people. Fuck you with your war. It's taking place somewhere there, like 700 kilometers from our peaceful Kiev. All right, fucking go and die there. We don't give a shit. All right. Of course, they changed their opinion very, very much in February 2022. Okay, everyone suddenly started fucking love Ukrainian military in Ukrainian society. But like, I'm honest with you, right? I'm honest with you. That's what a lot of Ukrainian soldiers can actually confirm. And I try to share my experience, my knowledge, no matter how meager that knowledge was, but I tried to share some of it with Ukrainian society because it was something important to understand how to act during air strikes, how to act during artillery strikes, what the war in the frontline town looks like, all right? And today, when I sort of through those comments, I can actually see a lot of grateful Ukrainian citizens that actually say, dude, like, thanks to your advice on what to keep in my emergency backpack, we are healthy and alive, right? Which is something that I freaking feel proud of, all right? And that is exactly the reason why looking at what is happening in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, that is something that I want to share with you as well, because we are afraid of what we don't know. We are afraid of those shady, mystical Russian Shaheds that are flying from who knows where and attacking who knows what. Maybe they will massively attack our houses and stuff, or maybe there will be like Russian tanks parachuting, over Los Angeles. I'm trying to explain what realistically this shit might look like, so you are prepared and you know what to expect, all right, in case of such thing actually taking place on your territory. Of course, if this shit happens in the United States or any other European country, whatever I'm saying here will already be a bit outdated because, again, we're preparing for the past wars. But the main concept will be approximately something like I have explained above. So let me address those questions in the chat real quick. Do you believe that Putin will break up with boyfriend Trumpy now that he threw him out of Venezuela? I believe that the only reason he threw Putin out of Venezuela was because Putin actually allowed him to do that in exchange for something else. Canadian people are now on high alert because of the US president and administration going after the oil in Venezuela. The Russians are as close to Canada as the US is. Yes, 100%. And people thinking about current situation, like I don't want to breed conspiracies, all right, but from what I can tell, it's not really like Trump and Putin are big adversaries nowadays. However, Putin is an adversary, but the fact is Trump is much more important to Putin than Maduro, and that is why we saw what happened. So there's a difference whether the Russians started something like separatism or whether they're just exploiting a situation that already exists. Russians can exploit the situation if Russians are prepared for the situation. Okay. In 2001, Putin, for the very first time, stated to President Bush that Ukraine should not exist and Ukraine should always belong to Russian Empire. So since 2001, they already had strategies for invading Ukraine. They already had them developed, all right? Developed and upgraded over time. And they only implemented that strategy in 2014, the annexation of Crimea and then hybrid war in Donbass, because they already had that mechanism. If we take a look, for example, at Abkhazia, all right, 1992, or even Chechnya, 1993, with native Russian tankers, that turned out to be Russian nationals, all right, driving Russian tanks and trying to remove the government of Jahar Dudayev. All right. They were arrested, they were detained, they were interrogated, they confessed on camera that I'm fucking Vanka from Ryazan. Yeah, but that was already element of hybrid warfare that we could easily see, for example, in Donbass in 2014. Then we have 2008, the war in Georgia, South Ossetia, all right, same shit. Proud local people who don't want to stay with those guys anymore, who want to reunite, all right, with beautiful terrorist federation. They have those mechanisms, they have those strategies, and they are planning to implement them, all right, to actually run those strategies. And they only need a perfect timing for that. You need to realize the stupid things the administration say mean nothing. The CIA, FBI is closely monitoring and learning everything from the war. 100%. I know exactly that law enforcement in the United States, the CIA, the intelligence community, they are closely monitoring. There's a lot of brilliant experts, all right. I am not an expert myself. I'm literally, my rank is captain, all right. I can not talk from the standpoint of a general, all right, big geostrategic things, those matters. I cannot discuss them from my level, but from my level I can talk about what Ukraine and other European countries faced and what they experienced, right, in terms of the Russian hybrid warfare. And that is why I am having this stream today with you, my friends. So, do you know if Europe is finding countermeasures against drones? I have to. Yes, Europe is finding countermeasures, and at this very point, they're trying to find some kind of legal base to be able to intercept those drones. All right, because, for example, in Germany, Bundeswehr is not allowed to shoot down drones over the airports, and they're trying to change their legislation so law enforcement, Bundeswehr, the army, the Air Force are able to do that. All right, and another thing, Europe, specifically Belgium, is already developing tiny cheap missiles that can be used specifically for this purpose. They have a low range, several kilometers max, and they are very good at actually shooting down tiny drones. All right, but the most effective technology is utilizing actually drones against drones. And it's literally up to the European countries if they can ramp up their capacity of producing those drones to be able to defend their airports, their infrastructure. The wall of drones is basically the strategy that all European countries are working on at this very point. Mongols sacked Kiev in 1240. They are freaking bastards, seriously. Those wankers have destroyed some of the most beautiful churches in Kiev, the Desatina church. In the downtown, there is still like a basement of this church available for everyone. But they are wankers, seriously. I don't like them for that. Not only me, by the way. Mongols did a lot of shit back in those days to Ukraine, China, Japan, Iran, the Persian Empire and stuff. We don't like them for that. They could use a drone with a net to tangle the props. Yeah, those are widely used in Ukraine at this very point. And not only them, not only the net drones, but also shotgun drones, all that goodness, they are utilized. Is the ignoring of unlawful orders in the US and Russia that cause alarm? I don't know how comment on that, because in Ukraine we faced a lot of cases, right, of unlawful orders. Ukrainian police, Ukrainian snipers shooting at protesters in 2014. We all saw that, all right? But we are Ukrainian people. We can talk about our experience. You are American people. It's up to you, all right, to decide what to do. People in the United States are the power, all right? The last Kiev Rus royal princess married to Polish king. Was it Princess Jadwiga? My God. Please remind me of this one. Polish princess married the Lithuanian king. There was Princess Jadwiga and Prince... I forgot. Yeah, it happened a long time ago. I wasn't even planned. Genghis Khan was cool in Bill and Ted, to be frank. Genghis Khan was cool in Starfield. There's a mission where there's like a colony on a planet that is populated by clones. All right, there's Roosevelt, there's Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan is so cool. And to those, yeah, Yagailo and Jadwiga, yeah, those guys. So Genghis Khan was cool, and if you played Starfield, if you side with Genghis Khan, you actually give all those people freedom, and they just do whatever they want, and then Genghis Khan starts freaking pirating other spaceships. One thing for sure, there won't be any more Ukraine peace talks anytime soon. So one thing that I would advise to monitor, all right, in the closest perspective, is first of all American president's rhetorics on Ukraine and Russian advances on the battlefield, because in case Trump's rhetorics on Ukraine will suddenly change, all right, and he will start literally pressing Ukraine to cede territories or whatever, or in case Russians all of a sudden acquire some kind of immediate unexpected breakthrough on the battlefield, that will serve as a confirmation that my conspiracy theory is right. Okay. Jadwiga was half Bosnian and a scholarly woman who loved books. A lot of Ukrainian princesses loved books. For example, Queen Anna, Queen Olga, they were very, very literate. And back in those days, when not many people could actually read and write, in every Ukrainian village you would have a school for kids, all right? And Ukrainian priests were primarily like teachers. They were teaching them to read and write. So that is what we have. You go to Sofia, for example, we have this huge complex called Sofia Kievska. I really need a Ukrainian keyboard here. Sofia Kievska. So I really, really need a Ukrainian keyboard, but we have Sofia Kievska complex, Sofia Kievska monastery in Ukraine. So this stuff is literally 1,000 years old, right? This very church. And when you go inside this church, on the walls you can actually see plenty of graffiti that were left there by people who attended the church. And for example, because it's a holy place, all right, you can see even things like agreements on the walls. Let me find it for you. My God, not this type of graffiti, right? Different type of graffiti. Here. you can see things like that. They are literally 1,000 years old. That is text literally scratched on the wall. All right, like those vandals back in those days. They would scratch such things on the walls of Sofia on the inside. There were agreements. For example, a dude wants to buy like 5 cows from an entrepreneur, and they make this agreement on the wall of Sofia. Literally during a sermon, they were literally standing there and scratching stuff on the walls before they were kicked out by the guards, apparently. But that's what we have in Sofia. So that stuff is very, very old, actually, and that's part of Ukraine's history. I think it was the same most places. They didn't bother teaching the serfs to read best to keep them working in the fields. Yeah. But in Ukraine it was necessary, apparently. In Ukraine, in our culture, somehow we realized that it was necessary for all the people to be able to read and write. And people in Ukraine, they actually spoke multiple languages. There were quite a few people who knew Latin. All right, if you are somehow related to church, for example, 100% you knew either Greek or Bulgarian or Latin, something of that sort. The Orthodox churches look so much better. I don't know. To me, Orthodox churches, I was raised as an Orthodox dude, all right, but to me, Orthodox churches look pretty much like they show off a lot, like those big golden domes and stuff. I like people who are humble, right? Are you still pursuing your Vibes channel, Alan? I would love to, all right? I would love to make more content for that, but first of all, I lack ideas, all right? And a bit less than that, I lack time. If I had several very, very cool ideas on what sort of content you would like to see there on the Vibes channel, I would literally make a bunch of those series straight away. I promise. Just let me know. If you have any ideas, just leave them there in the commentaries and I will check them out and see. Because, again, one thing that we should always do, all right, there on the other side of the screen, in order to stay sane and stay aware and functional, we should always motivate each other. That's one of my missions, by the way. That's one of my goals, to do whatever I can to help motivate other people. Because, for example, if you take a look at Russian propaganda, they are fucking incapable of producing any motivational content, and whatever Russians are producing, designing there, in terms of their propaganda, that's always some shit that is designed to demoralize you. And one thing that can literally destroy all that is, first of all, to stay in good mood and be motivated. So my goal is to motivate other people as much as possible, all right? But at times I need motivation myself, okay? And you guys are my motivation. If you guys just tell me literally, dude, make this episode, all right? I will literally do that because that stuff motivates me. So if you want me to sleep even less than I do, please do this. Please leave a lot of commentaries there telling what exactly content you want to see on Vibes Ukraine, or literally on any of my channels, either this one or the Captain Starsky Microsoft Flight Simulator stuff. I promise I will do that. All right. That's literally my big request to you, my friends, because you are my main motivational force. All right. I seem pretty motivated. My friend, that's because of you. That's literally because of you. I noticed that the more I stream and the more content I produce, the more I want to do that, all right? But if I have like a break, for example, a couple of days, then all of a sudden I start getting overwhelmed with different secondary tasks that are also important, but I do them instead of producing content, and then all of my work eventually degrades. So my friends, and Silver Earth, you my friend, that's something that I would address to you specifically. Please keep me motivated, all right? Please let me know what content you want to see on my channels. I will highly appreciate that, because that is my biggest motivation, all right? Literally. Even if I don't check messengers or whatever, freaking flood me, all right, with that. And I will do that for you. It's important. At one time, Ukraine was a land of refuge. The Cossack siege was literally a land of refuge. If you watch the Dune, I didn't see the second episode. I saw the first one, like the new one, all right? They talk about siege. That is literally based on Ukrainian siege. That is literally a place where Ukrainian peasants, criminals, or just people who want to be free, they would run to Zaporizhian siege, become Cossacks, join some of the most professional infantry of that era, and they were the free people. Cossacks were the free people. Please don't confuse with Russian Kazaki, because Russian Kazaki is like a cheap Chinese copy-paste, all right, of Ukrainian Cossacks. That's absolutely different shit. Remember a week later today. Oh my god. It's 9 p.m. Berlin time. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Tuna, thank you so much. I almost forgot about it. So it was like Australia for Europe. Yeah, 100%. We had that in Zaporizhian siege, and that was a legendary place, actually. In terms of not only military, but also culture. It was some of our national treasure, all right, before it was destroyed by Queen Catherine. Apparently she had some accident with a horse and broke something. But he's not capable of finishing a sentence without insulting someone. Who are you talking about? Let people talk against Trump? Yeah, that's another thing. Like, there's let's not mention Trump. Let's talk about some of his supporters that actually consider that Russia, that actually consider that the United States can just fucking do whatever, all right? Fuck you, Ukraine. Fuck you, American allies. Like, literally, that's a destructive sort of narrative, all right? That's a destructive sort of thinking. I have a question to the MAGA community. Why don't you support Ukraine if Trump supports Ukraine? And if you think that Trump doesn't support Ukraine, then are you trying to say that Trump is siding with Russia? And if Trump is not siding with Russia, if Trump is only siding with the United States, then Ukraine is also siding with the United States. So why the fuck don't you support Ukraine? Yo, Silver Earth, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your commentary, my friends. I appreciate knowing you for so many years. All right. Why do you vote for criminals openly? That's my question for them. well, let's be honest, there are always people who sided with criminals, all right? Like, check out the fan base of Charles Manson. And Trump can do whatever he likes and nobody says anything. Yeah. But again, even, for example, considering his absolutely illegal invasion of Venezuela, that, by the way, he already stated that United States will be ruling, all right, and controlling and stuff. Absolutely illegal invasion. Maduro, yeah, he is and was a motherfucker, but the invasion itself was illegal. Why? Because the nation on its way to becoming better, to be developed, all right, into a better version of itself. Nation should go through this. When Ukraine had Revolution of Dignity, we didn't have any American Chinook aircraft, full of American Spetsnaz landing on Mezhihiria palace of Yanukovych, stuff like that. We did this ourselves because this was our evolution, right? We evolved through this and we became better. That is why this revolution is called Revolution of Dignity. You can support other nations as much as you can, all right? But if you are involved in physical or moral of any regime, it makes you a foreign force, all right? That's why Ukrainians, for example, never call for American troops on the ground, British troops on the ground, right? We're talking about this only in terms of United Nations, in terms of peacekeepers. But we understand why other nations would not do that, all right? And why there will be no American troops on the ground in Ukraine. Apparently because there are no American oil rigs on the territory of Ukraine. What about free and fair elections in Venezuela? So, Jimmy, from what I heard, all right, from the statements made in the White House, they don't mention those elections much. They are talking that the opposition is not popular in Venezuela, and if it's not popular, then what was the point of removing Maduro at all, right? But yeah, we know that Maduro is a motherfucker and he's a bloody dictator. But on the other hand, if you don't want to delegate the control over Venezuela to opposition or literally have democratic elections in Venezuela, then what's the point of all that shit? Besides oil, all right? Because we know that, for example, Texas oil is able to immediately start processing the Venezuelan oil immediately, which will, of course, lead to decreasing the fuel prices in the United States. That's an obvious thing. The worst part of Charles Manson is that he actually wrote some pretty decent tunes back in the days. Not a fan, unfortunately. Well, Russians also wrote quite a few kick-ass tunes. And I remember back in the days, do you want to know what sort of most popular, one of the most popular music styles were in Ukraine? That was literally Russian chanson. What is Russian chanson? Is a low-quality, fucked-up prison songs, all right? Look at Russian convicts. They had a whole, style of music, right, dedicated to the fucked-up Russian prison culture. And for some reason that I am still struggling to explain, among, older population in Ukraine, this shit was, older population and Gopniks. That shit was so widespread before it suddenly disappeared from all the radio stations after Russia actually invaded Ukraine, which I can only fucking celebrate. But it was we're going on a train to Magadan, you know, and shit. The pigeons flying over our prison. I shit you not. And that was something that they call chanson. What an insult to chanson all this shit is. Seriously. That's not only an insult to my ears, but an insult to amazing music that was born in France. They're telling lies like always. Marina Corina Machado is pretty popular in Venezuela, like any person who got a Nobel Prize. 100%. In Ukraine, when we had the Revolution of Dignity, what was the result of the Revolution of Dignity? Of course, Yanukovych fled to the terrorist federation with the annual Ukrainian budget in his pocket. But also we had democratic elections, right? We democratically elected our president, our government, and we keep this good practice since 2014, right? So that was a direct result of the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine. Why it was important? It was important because Yanukovych forged elections. Yanukovych had election committees stamps, all right? Hundreds of those, and I showed them on photos in my previous streams, hundreds of those were found in the offices of his party when they were raided by the Ukrainian activists after the Revolution of Dignity. They found hundreds of stamps, all right? You vote, you have a bulletin, you vote, you throw the bulletin in the box, and then they collect everything, they stamp it, and they send it to the Central Committee, right? So they had stamps from every oblast and every city, all right? And they used them to forge elections, just like that. And to Ukrainians, it was very important to have democratic elections and let Ukrainian people actually elect the president and the government that we like. That is why we had Poroshenko, we had Zelensky. They were elected democratically, unlike fucking Putin. And that is another evidence, all right, that Ukrainian fascist regime, American power, it could not be installed through democratic elections, all right? It's fucking bullshit. That, America, Nuland fed people with cookies and installed an American puppet in Ukraine through democratic elections. You fucking kidding me? Do you even know how democracy works? Or if you can wade through mountains of historical details, read Timothy Snyder's Reconstruction of Nations, Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, Belarus. Yeah, that's a really good point. I subscribed to Timothy Snyder the other day on Substack, and by the way, I have my Substack nowadays. So if you have that stuff, please add me and join our chats. We are shilling Russians in my chats, often fun. I have always thought Putin wants to cut off Ukraine from the Black Sea by turning towards Odessa. Yeah, it was his plan. And by the way, when the Russians launched their so-called Russian Spring in Ukraine, when Crimea was annexed and then the hybrid invasion of Donbass, Kherson, by the way, they had that huge separatist meeting in Kherson 2014. A bunch of thugs came to the main square and they were immediately surrounded by people, by Kherson citizens. They were eggified. The eggs were used against those thugs. You can see archive videos of them literally standing there, all wet, white and yellow, all right? So they were Aggified and derussified right there immediately. So in multiple regions like Kharkiv, for example, there was also this separatist Russian Spring. It failed. It failed, by the way, due to the National Guard of Ukraine. I remember those days. And already there, they were trying to promote the so-called Novorossiya, all right, Novorossiya, the so-called southeast, Yugovnostok, Yugovnostok. That would actually spread from Odessa and all the way to Luhansk and Kharkiv. But Ukrainian people said, like, you're fucking kidding us. And in places like Kharkiv, like Dnipro, by the way, like Odessa, like Kherson, they didn't let that happen. Russia suddenly shut up and asked which country put 2 holes in the Ursa Major. Yeah, that was a good question. Actually, only Maduro and his wife are removed from their place in power. The rest of the regime is still there and in power. Yeah, that's another good point, because still a lot of people of this regime, and also people related to the cartel, they are still there, they're still in the power, but it's a different question. Let's say the snake is decapitated, but what exactly it will look like in the future, I am not trying to predict, because I am not an expert on Venezuela, right? Is it me, or does the US only attack countries that have almost no chance of defending themselves? My friend, based on the Sun Tzu, what will you do? Same with Russia, by the way, same with Russia. Why would you attack a strong country that actually can't defend itself? To fail the war? That's what you do if you believe that might makes right. Is Kharkiv busier now? I would say so. Probably I cannot talk much about it, but there's a lot of movement in that area. Decapitated snake. Snakes are no more trustworthy. Riki Tiki. Yeah. Riki Tiki knew what he was talking about. Human nature tends to favor self-serving cults. Yes, for some reason, it actually does. Morale booster is the only way to fix challenges. Absolutely, my friend. Absolutely. What is the main purpose, all right, of any war? Let's rephrase it. What is the main task, all right, before any military operation? The main task is to demoralize your enemies as much as you can, all right? If you are conducting a reconnaissance, if you're collecting intelligence data about an enemy unit, one of the most important things, if not the most important things, you are trying to understand about the enemy unit or enemy force in that area is what's their combat worthiness, what's their morale, right? It's always important. And that is literally the purpose of any informational warfare, to demoralize people. that demoralization can have different shapes, but the main purpose of that is to demotivate you, all right, to make you sad, angry, and upset, and that is literally the purpose of Russia's informational warfare in the United States, all right, to make you guys afraid of tomorrow. Not only in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, in France. That is literally what I know from studying the FBI data, all right, FBI materials that were published. So that is literally the main purpose. And one of the easiest, not easiest, but one of the simplest things that we can do in order to counter that is we gotta stay motivated, all right? We gotta learn more information on what we should expect, for example, from our enemies, again, because we are afraid of things we don't know. We gotta learn more about that. We gotta learn more, all right, acquire more of that knowledge, and not to self. Stop moaning is just demoralizing people. Yeah, absolutely. And be moralized. What's the best way to get moralized instantly? Freaking treat yourself with something good. This stuff always works. I can confirm. More coffee, yeah. Especially if you drop several drops of some, good Irish whiskey in it. That fixes everything. But generally, yeah, the most primitive thing that you can have in order to become more combat worthy, all right, instantly, in order to fix your morale instantly, based on Maslow pyramid. That's literally good food, all right, and other things. I must assume that you do not have an iron to flatten your flag. Do we need to send one to you? Andreas, again, my friends, because Andreas is German, all right? So I understand why you're asking about this, but in our culture, from what I've heard, all right, as far as I know, Ukrainian culture, we don't do that. So, for example, if the flag is like dirty, covered with blood, holes, and wrinkled and stuff, we don't touch it because it's this flag's history. This flag, by the way, arrived to me from United Kingdom, straight from United Kingdom, and these travel wrinkles on it remind me that it was sent to me by my good friend Simon, which I will appreciate. And also, it looks kind of like tiles, all right? Just a bit. It's to introduce some more details and shapes. Plus, they're square. German people like things that are, straight and square, all right? Why are Ukrainian women so sexy? I cannot tell you why they are. But as somebody that unfortunately faced a divorce, I can tell you that they are 100%, but not necessarily the sexiest in the world, all right? Let's not let's not have prejudice, all right? Music was the right introduction to hope and happiness. Yeah. Things like your favorite bands that you always listen to motivate yourself. That's absolutely incredible. That's something that always motivated people way before the propaganda as an, I cannot call it an art, but as a science, all right, was introduced. Germans are square. No. Germans like when everything is in order. Like, for example, when flags are ironed. All right. And again, this is something that I absolutely admire in German people. Okay, they will always tell you, dude, you are late to the stream. What the hell? Like, not scolding you, just like reminding you, right? Also, take care of your flag and stuff. This is something that I admire about German people, and this is something why I find them so adorable, seriously. The flag is fresh out of box. I do not buy the excuse to not flatten it, flatten put holes or different thing. I cannot argue, my friend. I most probably I will step over my principles, all right, and do that. Maybe I will delegate this to somebody else. For example, if some non-Ukrainian national does that, I will accept it, all right. How many people even own an iron these days? I had an iron in Ukraine, and I never used it at all. Literally, I bought an iron at some point. I bought like this ironing board. I never used it in years, and it's still there, and I've never even switched it on. Her shirt is flatter than the flag. Yeah, I know. And by the way, it's not just a shirt. That's a Kika's shirt that came to me straight from Iran. All right. It was delivered from that area where people are currently fighting against the fucking regime of bloody murderer Khamenei. So that's my way of supporting them to some extent. I kind of used to your an iron flag, I have to admit. You see, I already found leverage, all right, on some of my German family members, which was very, very hard to me as a Ukrainian. The wrinkles should fall out on their own over time. I wished it worked like that on people, all right? On people, unfortunately, it works the other way around. An occupational therapist taught me to iron by spraying with water, then swishing down with hands. I can try that. The yellow part resembles the small fields still to be found in Britain. The yellow, like when you look at any Ukrainian field, all right, you will immediately understand why our flag looks like this. There's, by the way, there's a lot of conspiracies and speculations about Ukrainian flag, because there's quite a few people in Ukraine that believe that yellow should be on top. Seriously, because there's a lot of people who believe that the original flag in Ukraine was literally yellow-blue, all right? And yellow represents fire and sun and stuff, and blue represents water and life, you know. And that is something that makes Ukraine great. You should just switch your flag, which I don't support at all. I don't support this idea at all, but I know why people think that this idea should have right to exist, right? Those synthetic fibers will not settle on their own, has to have water and mechanical force or heat. You are right. Probably, like, I'm streaming with this flag for already, several months, but still looks the same to me. Let's be honest, the colors on all flags are just random. They represent nothing. Let me think. In most cases, they kind of do represent something, because, like, in terms of heraldry, all right, heraldics, in terms of that culture, we know that there's a whole culture, there's like a whole science on creating seals, on creating flags and stuff, studying which symbol where to put and combine and stuff like that. So there's literally like people that are educated in this, in symbology. And we have that in Ukraine a lot, by the way. Like if you take a look at Ukrainian symbology, for example, the cross of the National Guard of Ukraine, we have similar cross. Cross of the National Guard of Ukraine is red. Cross of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, yes, I don't remember. The cross of SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine, is blue, and then we have the cross of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which is like red-violet, all right? So that all has some roots in the symbology, and for example, later we changed the cross because that's Cossack cross, all right? It can be found all over Ukraine, all those big stone crosses that you can see on Ukrainian kurgans and hills. That's something from our history, from the Cossack times. Later, we decided to change, for example, the symbol of National Guard from a Cossack cross to something that is more recognizable around the world, and especially in Europe, in places like Germany, France, Italy. That is the grenade, all right? Grenade and the police star. Because grenadiers were like the toughest and most elite troops, that were always protecting the state, and that is again deep in the symbology. Heraldics is like the art that I'm not very acquainted with, but I literally know people who worked in that and still keep working in that field. Because if you look at grenade, you can always find it in all sorts of National Guard units around Europe, Carabinieri, gendarmes, Ukrainian National Guard, and things like that. It's very, very exciting to actually study that and learn that. It's really cool. Color theory, it's all science when coupled with artistic expression, humanity. Yeah, I agree on this one. The Ukrainian flag is blue and yellow. Colors are associated with medieval Rus lands, particularly Galicia, Volhynia. Well, the national coat of arms, the trizub derives from Volodymyr the Great. I agree. Volodymyr the Great, or around his time, the trident was designed, the Ukrainian trident, with which represents the falcon that falls on his prey. All right, falcon with folded wings that falls down on his prey. That is literally the meaning of the Ukrainian trident, not really related to like Poseidon, all right, to that part of mythology, but that's the way we explain it, for example, in Ukraine, in Ukrainian schools. The Hutsul's Rada crosses are similar as Hutsul's Garda. Oh yeah. Oh my God, I read it as Rada. We should make war over the aesthetics of a folded flag, but not over bad primary election system, or not over low education of voters, and not over... look, when your force, when people you root for, all right, in your country, when they lose elections, it means that their opponents, let's be honest, it means that their opponents were better at communications. You cannot blame people, because whatever community you have, police, army, school, university, factory, you name it, oil company, I don't know, whatever community you're talking about, it's always representation of your people, all right? Wherever you go. That is why, personally, I never blame people. It only means that some political force had more effective communication. And it's not necessarily because Trump just had, he found those brilliant communicators with amazing communication skills and stuff. We know that Paul Manafort worked for him. We know who he is. And we also know that a lot of data on the American society was collected over the decades by the different Russian companies, all right, for reasons we all know. So it's not because people are bad, it's because they were better at communication. Their communication was more effective. Not necessarily it was good, all right? Not necessarily this communication brought some values into the society. Because, look, me as a PR manager, I am educated, I have master's degree at PR, I am educated that when you deliver some kind of narrative to the society, you're planting a value, you're planting a seed that will grow into something beautiful, all right? And you should design this seed as something beautiful. It depends on you what will grow. Will it be like a palachette or something? Or it will be a beautiful, beautiful tree, all right, that will provide a shadow for people, suffering from like sun, all right? It depends on you. And this is the way communications and specifically public relations work, the way they're supposed to work. But of course, like any other thing in our life, be it a religion, be it weapon, for example, it can be used in different ways. And that is why when we're talking about their communicators, yes, they were more effective. Did they bring anything good, saying that Haitians are eating your dogs and cats? All right, or that, let's not spend money on Ukraine, fuck them, let them just die. No, I don't think that they brought anything good, but they were effective in this. Like, for example, Goebbels, all right? Because let's be honest, his communication was also very effective, considering what they did. But there is a tiny, tiny nuance that I want you all, my dear friends, to remember. Hitler lost. In the US, our founding fathers were largely Freemasons, which is where the symbology came from. I was so impressed in Dresden. I went to this Frauenkirche, all right? Like the church that was bombed and destroyed during the World War II, and then it was ruined and kept as a ruin by the communists, all right, for decades before the reunification of Germany. And then it was rebuilt. So there's a bunch of old remains inside of this church. In the basement, you can go there and check out different artifacts left from it. And among those, I literally saw like this Freemason symbol on one of the pillars, all right? There's like a big chunk of a pillar with the Freemason sign on it. I was like, whoa, check that out. I didn't expect to see that. Yes, he lost, but not before killing millions of people, and that is unfortunately the tragedy, because people should be reminded that people are the power, all right? That is something that people should be reminded all over and over and over again. Because as soon as people say, fuck that shit, we just want, strong leader who will decide for us, that is the recipe for a disaster, right? People should be reminded over and over again that people are the power. And why I believe that the United States will still succeed, regardless of all that shitty scumbag informational warfare waged by Russia and all those fucked up narratives fed to the American society by Russian bot farms, by people like Elon Musk, by the way. Despite all that, I believe that American society will still succeed because they are strong. They actually showed the world what it means to have people that have power, all right? Fascism and communism are but right and left wing of the authoritarian political axis. That's, by the way, two different names of the same term, fucking evil. Right? Both communism and fascism, they are just different sorts of the same shit. Stalin intended to invade all of Europe regardless of whether Germany invaded Russia. So there are indications, and there are actually plenty of evidence that Stalin wanted to go further. All right, he planned to invade Romania. He planned to invade Sweden. All right, we're talking oil, we're talking metal. Sweden is known for its steel production, and Stalin actually dreamt about this. All right. There are plenty of historical evidence that he actually prepared for this. But Hitler decided to invade first. And if we're talking about conspiracies, all right, if we're talking about our favorite topic here, so there are indications that actually Stalin wanted to invade Germany first. Because if you take a look at what forces Adolf had at hand in 1941 and what the Soviets have, and Suvorov, the former KGB officer who actually writes a lot about the World War II, he talks a lot about this. He explains actually that Stalin had much more personnel, much more advanced aircraft, right? Airborne troops. Soviets had professional and advanced airborne troops, something that not many nations in Europe had back in those days. And also they were much stronger in terms of tanks, armored vehicles, and everything else. So why Stalin's attack was so, not Stalin, why Adolf's invasion of Soviet Union was so unexpected, all right? It's literally because Stalin was prepared to attack Germany himself. There were a lot of Soviet Unions placed on the border when Hitler's invasion of Ukrainian part of Soviet Empire started. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why Russians were withdrawing so fast. German troops literally could not find enough men to cover all those distances, to take them under control. The Soviets were running away just so fast because they were not prepared for defensive war. They were prepared for the offensive war. And of course, as usual, the Russian logistics sucked. And that is why Hitler's idea was to take as much territory as possible and then tell Stalin just basically what Putler is trying to tell Ukrainians today. He wanted to say, like, look, let's fucking stop fighting, all right? Because I will take more, all right? Let's negotiate somewhere in the middle. But Stalin refused to do that. All right. For, again, reasons not a lot of people can explain. I vote at the kitchen table, voter pamphlet in hand. Drive my ballot to election headquarters, then go for ice cream, vanilla. Oh my god, vanilla, Jesus Christ. That's my favorite one, actually. Thank you so much for your support. Vanilla is my favorite. Now we have Elon Musk, who can say things as cringe-worthy as Russian propagandists. Just so you could understand, all right? And again, there will be a lot of conservatives there in the commentaries saying, why are you trashing Elon Musk? You're biting the hand that feeds you, right? You are so ungrateful. You're such an ungrateful Ukrainian. You should be just conquered by Russians and eliminated for good. So basically, that is the reason why I don't respect Elon Musk. He says the European Union should be abolished and sovereignty returned to individual countries, as if they don't have that sovereignty, so that governments can better represent their people. And Dmitry Medvedev, the well-known Russian alcoholic, right? He says exactly, Elon Musk, you earned the love of the Russian people, because that's exactly what we expect. We want the European Union, the NATO to be dismissed, abolished, and we want your European countries to be less protected, all right? Because we are looking at you and we are literally imagining that sweet day when Russian tanks will be rolling again proudly down the streets of Prague, Budapest, and things like that. All right. Therefore, Elon Musk is one of the direct retransmitters of the fascist Russian ideas in the world, and he is the carrier of very, very dangerous narratives that are so dear and so respected by Russian terrorists. Remember next time, when somebody tells you that Elon Musk is a fucking great guy, just remember that shit, all right? I'm not even reminding you about Elon Musk Sr.'s visit to Alexander Dugin's conference last year in Moscow, all right? Apparently he was like running around asking where can Russia employ his son, all right? Just in case. But just a reminder that he's basically a scumbag because of that, because he is a direct supporter of the Russian terrorism, and still we don't have answers to many questions surrounding Elon Musk. For example, his involvement in Epstein case, all right? Because if you take a look at those parties, all right, at Epstein's, you can also find his face there. Yeah, Oleg, I completely agree with you, 100%. Why do you want Europe to be separated? All right. Why do you want European countries to be separated? What's the point of that? And if you call European countries to be separated, all right, from the European Union, that actually makes them strong and powerful today, and ready to deflect whatever invasion, right? If you want them separated, where is the guarantee that at some point you will not be calling American states to also separate? Where's the guarantee that one time you will not see Elon Musk calling for those guys to separate, all right? If he's calling so much for separatism in Europe, it makes him a very, very dangerous man. Musk's father goes to Moscow regularly. Yeah, I know that. And he also stated multiple times that he and his son, they consider Putin a very strong and smart man, all right? I prefer to completely ignore Musk. He's an ignorant jerk who actually used other people to get rich. Yeah, I agree on that. Again, if you take a look at the people we can often see at photos, all right, dancing and chilling at Epstein's palace, all right, Homsky, whatever, Musk, Prince Andrew, all right. All those people are generally united with several features, right? They have several common features. For example, like fucking being evil, I don't know. I would never respect a person throwing Nazi salute, all right? I would never respect this person, because if you're throwing a salute that looks like Nazi salute, all right, you can come up with whatever fucking excuses for that he's autist, that whatever. But when he does shit like that, it tells a lot to me, and I will not respect this person. You can ignore Tavarish Muscovite, but he's a trillionaire asshole. He can buy entire countries, ignored or not. Yeah. That's another reason why we should stay aware, all right? Why hasn't Musk's father registered as a foreign agent? It's a good question, generally speaking, because when an immigrant says "fuck immigrants," sounds kind of weird. Heard some people imported soil from Texas so they can give birth on U.S. soil. Yeah, that's interesting. Does it work though? It's like in the was it in the Caribbean Pirates or something? Pirates of the Caribbean Sea. When the dude was like walking in the shoes full of soil. Yeah, that's one of the cases. "55% of Britons now say it was wrong for the UK to leave the EU, with just 11 seeing Brexit as more of a success than failure." I would really like to, I don't know, to invite somebody from the UK who has proper understanding of that. What I can immediately say is that I know that, again, very, very evil technologies were involved in the social media in order to make it happen. Plenty of disinformation, and there's a whole bunch of investigations made on that in terms of Brexit. I would like to dive into conspiracies and say that there's a Russian trace, all right, which is something I believe, but I just don't want to speak loudly about that, because, like, people will say that, like, dude, you're fucking crazy. You are so biased about Russians, which I am. Elon is an idiot. In our minister, Sikorsky has repeatedly snarked at Elon and said that Poland will stop paying for Starlink for Ukraine and will propose another solution. Elon is the dude who will be pushing his drug, all right, who will be selling his Starlinks to you, and at the same time saying shit about you. Sikorsky says that because Elon keeps scaring us and threatening us that with blocking the Starlinks we bought for Ukraine. Yeah, absolutely. Poland is responsible for like big chunk of Starlinks that Ukrainians are using nowadays. And also USAID actually bought those Starlinks. Again, there's a lot of people that are unfortunately very ignorant in the United States. Those kind of people who say, like, why should we even consider, right, supporting Ukraine? And I am just tired to telling them over and over and over again that when United States were attacked by Al-Qaeda and they called their NATO allies, Ukrainians, a non-NATO state, having nothing to do with NATO at all, Ukrainians actually sent thousands of Ukrainian soldiers to demine the roads in Iraq and Afghanistan, so American soldiers, their comrades, their allies are safe, all right? That's something that factors don't remember, and yeah, I consider them factors, seriously, because if they failed to graduate from middle school, all right, and they don't know history and simple fact, doesn't mean that those facts never existed, never happened. Those people are also saying that you're such ungrateful because Elon Musk gave you thousands of Starlinks when you were fucking, attacked, or right, panicking, they're screaming in Ukraine. He gave you Starlinks and he fucking saved your ass. So first of all, those Starlinks were paid by the taxpayers' money, all right? By you, my friends. So that is literally what American people provided to Ukraine via USAID that Elon Musk shut down, because USAID started asking questions. Why did you shut down Starlinks over the Black Sea during the Ukrainian military operations? Why did it happen? And that is why he decided to shut it down. That is something that we should also remind to those people who don't have enough knowledge, all right? So let's not be very critical to them, because if they live in their tiny convenient bubble, all right, of misinformation that they like and enjoy listening to Tucker Carlson stuff, and don't want to understand things that take place outside of it. And by the way, yes, 18 Ukrainian soldiers died in Afghanistan and Iraq. They were not fighting against the insurgents, but they were actually demining the areas, the roads. They were clearing them of IEDs, so their American comrades and brothers and sisters were safe, all right, from IEDs. That's what Ukrainians did in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that is something that we should keep reminding them. And as well as the fact that actually American taxpayers paid for those Starlinks, all right? They were paid. The USAID bought those Starlinks, and Pentagon actually provided the subscription, all right, for those Starlinks for the Ukrainian armed forces. This is something, again, that they don't remember, because, like, why? Like, fuck Ukraine, you know? America first. So, another thing that I wanted to mention regarding Starlinks is, of course, the fact that he doesn't want to lose the income, all right, if he shuts down the Starlinks. Of course, that will be a huge hit on SpaceX. Literally, it will be a huge hit in terms of income. It will be also a big reputational loss for the SpaceX. That is why he will not shut them down, neither for Ukraine nor for any other country. wondering why politicians still use Twitter. I will explain it easily, my friend. It's because if you don't speak, then somebody is speaking instead of you, all right? That is one of the principles of the informational resistance. If you don't express your opinions, if you're not fighting on this informational front, then this front will be full of people and individuals speaking instead of you. I deleted my account on X because it made absolutely no sense. I had something approximately 120,000 followers there, but despite all that, only a few thousand of people were actually seeing my publications because the pro-Ukrainian channels, pro-Ukrainian accounts on Twitter, they were throttled. And a lot of people, including Professor Gerdes, by the way, many people, Jake, bro, we all noticed that despite the fact that we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers there on Twitter, but when we post something, we have less reach. Our publications are actually read by less people than, for example, on Blue Sky, where we have several hundred, several thousand followers. Right now on the Blue Sky, I have just a bit more than 9,000 followers, and I see from the statistics that more people watch my publications there than 120,000 followers on Twitter would. All right. So that was one of the reasons why I decided to delete my account, because it made absolutely no sense to continue running it. But at the same time, there are people, for example, like President Zelensky on Twitter. Of course, there is no way his posts will be throttled for obvious reasons. And also, Twitter is actually a very, very cringy place, if you think about it, because on Twitter, you have many, like that one, for example, all right, like Dmitry Medvedev, okay? Not a lot Russians actually use Twitter. In Russia, because all the Western social media are not very popular, like they are promoted as enemy social media in Russia, right? So they throttle the traffic to the YouTube, they throttle the WhatsApp traffic. It's a fact, all right? They also banned Instagram and Facebook in Russia because they consider those social media extremists. I shit you not. The Roskomnadzor literally considers those social network extremists. So at the same time, take for example Iran, they banned Twitter for people, but on Twitter they have Khamenei with his account speaking freely. Everything's fine. That is why Twitter is kind of place, all right, for people who want free speech, but not for all right? Only for people, for specific people that Elon Musk wants to be heard. As soon as Musk took Twitter, I left. I refused to give any popularity or money to that jerk. Yeah, I support that. And I completely support the idea of transferring, for example, to Blue Sky. I tried to contact those guys because one thing that I wanted to research actually is how exactly they are fighting against bot farms. We know that there is Matryoshka or Balalaika. There's like this Russian bot farm that is already spotted on Blue Sky, and I wanted to actually learn about the technologies used to fight against that. So most probably I will send them another message and make some kind of video on that, maybe invite somebody for the stream. That would be cool. But I know for sure that Blue Sky has much more mechanisms of fighting against spreading disinformation. They don't throttle anybody, all right? They are proper folks, all right? AI is becoming pain in the ass on YouTube too. It has become pain in the ass, my friend, quite a while already. All right. Since probably 2023 at least. Telegram is the best social media app, free speech and many features. Yeah, I agree on that. But on the other hand, quite a few of those Telegram servers are based in Russia. So that is something to keep in mind. The my God, encoding. All right, encoding the security on Twitter on Telegram is kind of okay. But at the same time, it's necessary to remember that quite a few of those servers are on the Russian territory, and who the fuck knows what sort of access they have. Therefore, for example, I'm using Telegram, but primarily for such purpose as collecting interesting updates from different communities, bringing them to you, my friends, because the most interesting and less mainstream information can be often obtained from Ukrainian-speaking or Russian-speaking communities, and this is why I'm here, because I can literally translate all that for you, my friends. I need to get back on Blue Sky. I do have an account there. You do that, my friend. The more of us good guys, all right, concentrated in the social media, the better. 100%. Running local AI models is nice, but you do need a fat amount of VRAM. Yeah, I also agree on that. Again, depends on which purpose. Why do you need to run those models? Because, for example, ChatGPT works perfectly well. You know yourself. That dude is like 100% supporter of Ukraine. He responds Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava, almost all the time, all right? Like a lot. And why ChatGPT is so cool is because it's based on this huge computer infrastructure, right? Not like 6 gigs of RAM. It has like millions of gigs of RAM. So you can easily use it for any purpose. Why would you run AI locally? I don't know. The limitation to AI is that it's too must source. The limitation to AI is that it's not perfect, all right? It's a mistake to think that sponsoring neo-Nazi tech X will bring you freedom from them somehow. You need to examine your brain if you think so. Yeah, I agree on that. Of course, the craziest shit Elon Musk introduced, all right, on X is that if you want to be heard, if you want to be seen on Twitter, you gotta pay money, all right? And those were not big money. Like looking at the potential outcome, I literally invest my own money to make the content that I produce, the content dedicated to fighting Russian disinformation, to be seen and shared and stuff like that. But it's like when you pay your own money to be seen, and you are only seen by a few hundred people while having 120,000 subscribers, that shit is not worth it, 100%. Graphic cards and RAM now are more expensive than gold. Yeah, that's true. Because the billionaires want to force people to use their online services instead personal computer. That's one way of looking at it. I agree. You'll be surprised how clever a large language model running on even 8 gigs or 16 gigs can be. It's also somehow you own. It's also something you own and I'm tied to someone else for. Well, I agree on that. If you're doing, for example, coding, if you are creating art on your computer, then yeah, 100% is better than have something yourself, something that you can control, like do whatever you like to it. But me personally, I use uh, whenever I need to generate something, I use Photo Leap on iPad. Really cool stuff, all right? If you need some kind of graphic background or literally anything. When I made a story about Queen Olga on Vibes Ukraine, so I used the face of a real Queen Olga, and I generated a lot of photos in this photo leap using like her face, so like it's the same woman everywhere. And I basically used that as illustrations to build the whole story. So that was kind of kick-ass. And you can do that in Photo Leap. And what else? And also ChatGPT. Yeah, ChatGPT is very good as, let's say, search engine. All right, if you need some kind of results, and if you know how to write prompts properly, you can of course use it to search necessary data, analyze it, and provide you with some sort of result. Okay, because to me, this stuff is so convenient nowadays. You don't need to literally surf through tons of websites. You can just delegate that to the AI. And when AI brings you the results, you yourself personally, you go to every source, every website, check information, and it just saves you so much time that you can spend on literally eating sushi, drinking coffee. Yeah, Olga is absolutely amazing. Her story is crazy. My friends, those who didn't watch it, please go to the Vibes Ukraine, to my side channel, and check it out. I'm tech lexic. How is that? AI is a tool, fantastic tool, in fact, that you can use to do good stuff, but people are abusing and exaggerating it. Just like anything in excess, it becomes annoying. I agree. Especially if you are if you're listening, for example, different documentaries on a YouTube. That's something that, oh my god, you can easily recognize if it was written using ChatGPT. Okay. Like, today we will talk about some shit. Spoiler, this shit is not something that you expect. It's not just blah blah blah, it's a blah blah blah. Like, those cliches are very, very widespread. You can literally hear it in every voiceover, like in every documentary nowadays. It's literally so annoying. I hate this crap. I still consider, that authors deserve respect when they actually write their voiceovers and their content themselves. But of course, AI is good at polishing the text, because English is not my first language, as you probably noticed, and sometimes like it kind of. It's kind of limpy, all right? So sometimes it's good to use AI to help you with editing. I promise to never write even a sentence using AI. Don't know how. Just, you gotta learn prompts, all right? Runs Linux never have used wind blows because of the amount of bloated crap in that OS. I agree on that. I used Linux myself for a while. Unfortunately, you cannot play much on Linux, and even though you have like Steam OS, SteamOS would probably be the only operational system I would install, you know. But I have Windows PC and I use it to play my favorite games. Microsoft Flight Simulator. I didn't play Microsoft Flight Simulator since 24th November 2025. I checked my Steam yesterday, and that is literally the fact. All right, how crazy is that? Linux rules, absolutely. Linux is just so cool. But it requires you to evolve, all right? If you're just a lazy user, then it's not for you. I tried using a coding agent yesterday. It was terrible. I tried using the ChatGPT to help me build a website, and it was so good. It was really good. And it literally took me a couple hours to build everything. Cold Stral and similar is okay for knocking out a function or two, but the vibe coding whole application is a good way to get really obscure bugs. Yeah, I can agree on that. Sometimes AI creates some very, very stupid mistakes, all right, in the code specifically. That's just ridiculous. Okay, my friends, first of all, big thanks to all the moderators and also big thanks to all of you, my dear friends and family. They're on the other side of the screen. I will be probably going to a grocery store because I also have an upcoming stream with Rick and Roman. Please check it out, don't forget. And I will see you soon. Tomorrow we will be streaming in the evening as always because Monday is a shit day. I have a lot of tasks that I have to accomplish, but in the evening we will have our traditional chats, all right? Maybe not as serious as today, but we will, I promise. So, thank you so much. Big thanks to all the moderators, big thanks to all the members of my chat. Also, please don't forget to check out the link in the description, the Christmas card for Rubizh Brigade. Again, those are my guys. I'm trying to do whatever it takes to help them. And we already collected almost 50% of the necessary funds. You can find everything there on the page of Car for Ukraine. Those guys are absolutely legendary, as always. And also, big thanks to your amazing questions, your commentaries, your motivation. You know that you guys are the power that always motivates me and makes me do all the streams every single day over and over and over again and never get tired of that. Thank you so much. Don't forget to bomb and flood my commentaries with the content that you want to see, okay? Because I always need motivation from time to time, and you are the power that is capable of motivating me in any time of the day, any time of the week. So thank you so much for that. We'll see you soon. Be safe. And don't forget to treat yourself with something good. Bye-bye.